sitze wieder mitgerecht. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen out there for the second time this evening. I'm Karina from the Matura Express. I hope life is treating you well out there. We have, as compared to before, we have a more difficult, harder topic if you want. We are talking about international trade. So what the plan is basically I'm going to give you some vocabulary that is related to trade and to the institutions that basically make up the whole topic. There will be some definitions as well that I think might be useful for your future exams. And I will also briefly talk about some of the institutions that are related to trade, that play a role in trade. I'll also try and give you some new input on the topic of globalization, like what is it, what are the pros and cons. It's a very broad topic and you probably do know a lot about it already. I'll just try and come up with some ideas that you may not have thought of yet. So we're talking about the pros and cons of globalization. There's two ways of spelling out there, so just in case you're interested or you need it at some stage. The Z version is the American one, the version with the S, globalization here, is British English version of the word. And as there are quite a few drawbacks to globalization, or so some people say, I'll also talk about fair trade a little bit, because some people see that as a means, as a measure to kind of counterbalance all the negative effects that globalization has. We'll see. You can then think about whether or not you think that fair trade and its concepts, and fair trade with all the pros and cons that there are to it, if it is really something that can kind of, or that outweighs the negative points that globalization has. That's up to you to think about. Maybe we can also discuss it maybe. So, as promised, some words beforehand. Some vocabulary that is related to the topic trade, international trade. Especially in the topic of globalization, we sometimes hear about globalization leading to bad working conditions, I guess, like keywords, child labor, exploitation of workforces. So you may need the word Arbeitsbedingungen. The Arbeits part should be clear, but then there's the Bedingungen, working conditions, people working under bad conditions, people having bad working conditions, so that's the collocations that you'd normally use it with. Usually you use it in its ing form, so it's working conditions, not work conditions, but then I guess the most important part is the condition one anyway. Armut, you probably all know it, but it's on the sheet because sometimes the types of words, the Wortarten, do cause some problems here. Armut, a noun, is poverty, and the verb to go with it, and the adjective as well, that is poor. Sometimes when you overhear people's conversations or in their preparations for the A-levels, they basically use the word poverty as the verb as well, or as the adjective as well. So please make sure that you know that there's that poverty and poor is what goes together. Jemanden ausbeuten oder Ausbeutung, also one of the words that we will come across again in the globalization topic. To exploit someone or somebody, jemanden ausbeuten, and the noun exploitation. To exploit someone and exploitation, die Ausbeutung, the noun to go with it. In globalization or in international trade, you of course do trade goods, of course. Goods, but you also trade Dienstleistungen. You do not only trade goods, you also trade Dienstleistungen, you trade services. Dienstleistungen as services. Then globalization is very good for like establishing new companies, establishing new businesses. You may need the word for Gründung, Firmengründung, something like that, which is either the foundation of a company, for example, or the establishment of a company. That would also work. As vocab is a very important part of your exams, you also may want to make sure that you have synonyms ready every now and then, so as to not repeat yourself all the time. Firma, a pretty easy word, you all know that. Company. Then you talk about slightly larger companies called Konzerne. They would be corporations. Usually also mentioned in globalization when it comes to like the death of smaller businesses, and everyone tries to be as big as possible and found corporations instead of single companies. The next one is not that hard. You probably all know the word, a monopoly, a monopole. So if only one person or one big company, if they are the only one in the area, in the country, selling a product or offering a service, then they're a monopoly. Reichtum. Most common word, wealth. Probably know that. And the words on the sheet, because the noun version, the Hauptwort version, sometimes causes some trouble and some confusion. So Wachstum, the noun, is growth. Wachsen as a verb is to grow. Grown, the irregulars. Sometimes people in oral exams struggle with the noun growth. Slightly unusual formation of a noun, really. Then, let's have a look quickly. Let's go through the words again. Arbeitsbedingungen, working conditions. Armut, poverty, to be poor, as its verb, and the adjective, a poor person. So the adjective is also poor. Exploit, exploitation for Ausbeutung und Ausbeuten as a verb. Dienstleistungen are services as opposed to goods. You can sell or trade both. You can Waren- und Dienstleistungen, you can like sell and offer them both. Eine Firma gründen, to found a company. Found would be the verb of foundation, die Gründung, to found a company, eine Firma gründen. It's a regular verb in that case, so found, founded, founded. The company was founded in 1985, whatever. So don't confuse it with the irregulars of find, please. A firma is a company. A concern, so a slightly bigger one, a corporation. Only one company being the leader on the market, a monopoly. Wealth, for Reichtum, growth, to grow, grown, irregulars. Easy one. There's also some definitions that you should have ready, I suppose, but I'm gonna write them down here so it's easier for you to follow. Also related to international trade, or very much related to international trade, is of course the World Trade Organization, which is a quite big body of 153 members, so covers quite many countries all over the world. There's some countries which actually want to join, but they're still negotiating whether or not they're allowed. Croatia, for example, would be one of them. They have wanted to join for a while. I don't know what the state of the art is in the discussions, but anyway, they have their headquarters, which is also a very good word, by the way. Headquarters, the Hauptsitz in Geneva, Switzerland. And what they basically do is they are trying to make international trade easier, facilitate, word for erleichtern, they want to facilitate trade by reducing costs at the borders, for example. So they want to make imports cheaper or give companies the chance to sell their products at a cheaper price by not having to pay such high tariffs. Trading goods is always related to money, and they are trying to keep the tariffs, the money that has to be paid in order to be allowed to trade, basically. They are trying to keep that to like reasonable minimum. What they also do, and what their main aim is basically the business relationships. So they want to make sure that there are good business relationships between, I don't know, Germany and Austria, or Germany and England. That's their main aim. And they also interfere, fight sounds a bit hard, I guess, if there are disagreements between the countries. So if there are parts of some certain trade deals that two countries cannot agree on, it's the World Trade Organization that basically decides who's right and who's wrong and who has to give in to who. Their judgments are binding, so if the World Trade Organization says, well, you are right and you're wrong, and that's the way it's going to be done, then the respective countries have to do it. What else? Oh yeah, there's, of course, in the World Trade Organization, there's also some negative points. That's a terrible smiley thing. Anyway, people are not entirely happy with the world, or they're not happy with all the World Trade Organization does, mainly for the fact that they do not really consider the needs of the developing countries. So what human rights organizations say is basically that the World Trade Organizations and the 153 members that there are trying to basically make themselves richer without considering developing countries. That's why you should not play with pens while trying to talk. Anyway, so there is some criticism going on. There's always some protests going on as well about people saying, yeah, well, it's the 153 members of the World Trade Organization are the rich countries, and there's hardly anyone taking care of the developing countries or thinking about how the trade and how the economy of developing countries could be improved. So that's a strong point of criticism that you also hear in the media every now and then, that there's protests against the World Trade Organization and similar organizations. It's not the only one of that kind. Then there is something that in history went down as G8, the Great Eight. Very, very creative acronym in that case. Now it's only the G7 anymore. So the G8, the Great Eight, reduced themselves to the G7. It's what people in, I think it was the 70s, agreed on were the big industrial nations of the world. Of course, the United States, Canada, Japan, the UK in Europe, of course, Italy, France, Germany, of course, and last but not least, Russia. Do I have 8? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So that was the G8. I think the G8, or the concept of the G8, was founded in 1975, but I'm not 100% sure. You may want to look that up. Now it's only G7 anymore because Russia was suspended in 2014 after what was in the news as the annexion of the Crimea. So the G8 basically decided that Russia cannot play a role in the game anymore because the aim of the G8 or G7 now, what they basically do is discuss, as the book puts it, world problems and crises that there are, and what the G8 or the rest of the countries basically said is, well, if you forcefully annex the Crimea, then you can't be part of a body that is there to solve problems. So Russia was suspended. I think this year Vladimir Putin announced that he wants to leave anyway, so there's no need in keeping him suspended, but he'll leave voluntarily, basically. So now it's only G7 anymore. It's the countries that I've mentioned beforehand. Their problem or their main aim is to discuss global problems and challenges, as I've already said, like, for example, the hunger crisis in Africa. That was one of the topics of this year's G8 summit. What's it called when they meet, actually. It's a G7 summit, ein Gipfeltreffen, I think. This year they met in Italy. You've probably heard about that. Made newspaper headlines as well. There was quite a few protests going on again because what human rights organizations and people who are interested in the topic basically say is that the G7 summits again only discuss problems in, like, they do discuss problems, but they always try to solve them in such a way that it's beneficial for the industrialized nations, for the developed countries again, and that it's not really, that the purpose is not really discussing the problems of the developing countries as it should be. So yeah, the African hunger crisis, for example, is a topic, or how to provide help in case of natural catastrophes and so on and so forth. So the G7 are trying to kind of come up with plans for crises and so on and so forth. But then again, as I said, there was some problems or some protests going on. You actually may want to look, like before your exam, you actually may want to look up the G7 summit of this year. Gives you a link that makes the topic a bit more current, which is always good in your exams, like being up to date and showing in your exams that you are up to date is a good thing, really. Then the next two institutions are about money, mainly. So we have the World Bank, the Weltbank, we translate quite literally into German, and then we have the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. Monetary, you may not have come across that word all too often. Both institutions, even though they're independent from each other, really, have the same aim, independent. Their aim is to provide loans, Kredite, somehow, to countries that are not that well off, that needs help from the developed countries. The World Bank was established after the Second World War because the plan was to help countries who were destroyed, who got severely bombed during the war in the reconstructions. So that was when the World Bank was founded. Ever since then, they have launched a lot of reform programs as well, invested money into countries like Greece. We all know that Greece was bankrupt, or is bankrupt really, and needs money from both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So that's what they do. They give loans under different conditions to countries who can't really make any money from their trading businesses anymore, or not enough money from trade, import and export only. So that's what they are there for, basically. I think that's it for the definitions. So if we have a look at what I just wrote down, or not. So we have the World Trade Organization. As I said, they are responsible for trading relationships between countries, making sure that trade's done fairly and in a fair way, and also to negotiate the terms on which trade's done. Then we have the G7. The G7, by the way, is not a fixed institution. They also do not have any headquarters. They also don't have any money, really. They only discuss stuff. So they can't say, well, I give you money because you need help. That's not what they're doing. They're just discussing challenges that the world has to face. Their summits, their meetings are in a different country every year, and there is no such people, or there's no people who are only and exclusively working for the G7. So it's basically like a flexible body of people who are discussing stuff, problems, and so on. Then, well, that's the same one. And we have the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Usually, that like all of the institutions that I mentioned, they do get a good deal of criticism, mainly for like privileging developed countries and not taking enough care of the developing countries, like that are actually the countries who'd really need help the most. Anyway, some definitions of terms and some ideas on what you could say in your exams. The first big concept that we are all confronted with in the 21st century, the concept of globalization. Pretty sure there's spelling mistakes in it. Nope, there are not. So globalization, a very, very broad concept. So if I were you, I would consult the internet and come up with some sort of a working definition of what globalization is for you. If you do it, Google research, if you type the word globalization into Google, there's like a lot of pages coming up and a lot of different definitions. So if I were you, I would just point out a few of the most important aspects, or aspects that you think that you can talk about in the exam. That's what I did actually, and there's like, I'll share my ideas with you. If you have any ideas yourself, please. Natasha's waiting for comments. Let's start with the good things about globalization. There's of course a lot of benefits to the whole concept. So basically, like a very short definition of globalization is that the whole world becomes more connected by trade, by social media, by whatever there is. So we know a lot more about other countries. We can do business with other countries. They know a lot about us. They can do business with us. Global, meaning world. So I guess that's the basic idea of the whole thing. The world is becoming one place without borders, without limits, without places that we don't know anything about, without places that we don't have any access to. One of the standard pros that is always mentioned is the one with the traveling. Passports, open borders, more or less open borders. You do not need a visa any longer for most places. For example, like a couple of years ago, when as soon as you wanted to travel to England, you needed a visa, a tourist visa. We don't need that anymore, so that has made traveling a lot easier, has facilitated traveling a lot. Passport controls go way quicker now than they did a while ago.
We got 2 questions about the vocabulary. One question is if firm is also an equivalent with company.
Nice question. Could you write that down? Firm exists, but is mainly used in, like, lawyers would have firms, and tax consultants, Steuerberater. So you talk about law firms and tax consultant firms, but you would not talk about a firm if you talk about a clothes company, for example. So firm is the word that you use for lawyers' offices, tax consultants, stuff like that. So a lawyer, an Anwalt, would always have firm. He would be employed by a bigger firm, for example. But you would not use it for clothes or food or groceries, whatever.
And you said the vocabulary wealth for Reichtum. And he was asked if richness would also be correct.
Let me think about that. Richness. I don't think that you would use richness so much for individual people. I don't think that you talk about the richness of a person. You would talk about the wealth of a person, but you would talk about stuff like cultural richness, for example. So if you talk about Austria being the greatest place on earth because it offers a lot of cultural richness, then it would definitely work. I don't think that you'd really use it for one single person. So saying that, I don't know, Bill Gates has accumulated a lot of richness probably would not work. You'd always say he has accumulated a lot of wealth. But you can definitely say, you could definitely use richness in terms of like cultural richness or literary richness. That also works. Literary. So if you have a country with a lot of authors and writers who avidly publish books and stories and stuff. But I would not use it for persons. Good. Where was I? Actually, oh yeah, I was at the borders. Yes. So traveling has become easier. No passports, no visa. You can now travel to England without a visa. You needed a tourist visa. I can vaguely remember that I needed a tourist visa when I was there with school for the first time. So it's a long time ago though. So traveling is easier. Biggest benefit of globalization. Something that is also usually mentioned as a pro point is, I should stop writing in the left-hand corner. That word's supposed to mean choice. When you do your grocery shopping, you now have a lot more choice than you did a couple of years ago. There's like several different brands of like the same thing. You can choose between, I don't know, 10 different types of yogurt and 20 different types of pasta, basically. We also owe the big choice that we have to globalization because we can import stuff or goods. Importing stuff has become a lot easier as well. So I suppose that's why we have so much choice, which for us as a consumer is a good thing. Might not be the best thing for the economy really at the end of the day, but for us, good for the consumer. For us, it's definitely a good thing. So what else do we have in terms of pros? Oh yeah, jobs. Jobs, mobility, and education. Definitely pro points. Nowadays, it's fairly easy to say, well, after graduating from school, after doing the A-levels, after finishing university, whatever it is, finding a job elsewhere, finding a job abroad is quite easy. Globalization and the European Union, which is part of the concept of globalization, really has facilitated work abroad and going abroad to find a job much easier than it was. You don't need any visa anymore, really, so you can just go and look for a job elsewhere. So job mobility is one of the key words always mentioned in the same sentence, basically, as globalization is. So you can move wherever you want to, wherever the job, the profession that you have is needed, basically. So if you think IT is more needed in England, you're basically free to go, which is a good thing, really. In education, it basically works along the same lines. If you as a student plan on going abroad, you can do a program that is called Erasmus. For as far as I know, it only works within Europe, so Erasmus is something that is limited to Europe, but in any case, depending on what you study really, but you can go to Scandinavian countries, you can go to England, you can go to Spain, you can go to Italy, you can pretty much go everywhere and do an exchange semester, which is now with like less strict visa agreements and stuff also much easier than it used to be. So you can see the world really, be it in jobs or during your time at the university. So I suppose it's a big benefit as well. And what else do we have? Culture. Good point. Usually the culture pro point is connected or linked with the internet. it is really easy nowadays to find information about everything and everyone, all the countries that there are in the world. The internet is a big platform that offers a lot of knowledge about culture, and also the fact that there's so many, or that there's people moving around for jobs, that there is job mobility. We learn a lot about other cultures. We bring the most important aspects of our culture to other countries. We discuss it. We learn from each other. So, and as I said, Google facilitates a lot. So do an internet search, do a Google search, and you can learn about countries, languages, people, traditions, whatever you want. So we also owe that to globalization, really. What else do we have in... Oh yeah, jobs, we've already mentioned that. But it's also good for the companies in this case, because having a broader pool of applicants to choose from, people from other countries, people of like different religious backgrounds, people of different languages, whatever, they definitely can contribute to the success of a company. Nowadays, the companies can pretty much choose who they want to employ and really fit or find an employee that actually fits the job description 100%, that speaks the necessary languages, that has the necessary education. So it is a good thing for the companies. They have more choice and can really pick the perfect candidates. Any other pro points? No, I think that was it. No. Let's come to the negative points. There's a good many. There is people who say that globalization, it probably has fewer disadvantages than advantages if you like make a list of pros and cons. But then there are some people who say that the con points are quite strong. Starting, of course, with pollution. Environment nowadays always an aspect to be considered. Because we have so much choice and because we import so much, we have a lot of pollution, mainly air pollution in this case, but also noise pollution. Because we import fruits from, I don't know, well, Italy, but that's not that far away, but then we'd also import stuff from South Africa, for example. That does create a lot of air pollution, be it because of the trucks or because of the airplanes. Flying is not exactly the most environmentally friendly means of transport either. So there is a lot of air pollution, there is a lot of noise pollution as well. Being on a motorway from Monday to Friday when all the big trucks bringing goods back and forth, well, that is a quite noisy thing. So pollution is a point of criticism that, people who think that pollution is, or that globalization is bad, think that pollution is a very strong argument, and that it has increased a lot ever since the world has become such a globalized place. Other minus points, you may have heard that word before. Also one of the catchwords of the 21st century, 20th century probably as well. Outsourcing. The German one would be, I think the closest equivalent would be auslagern. So the concept of outsourcing is basically a company with its headquarters in Austria or Germany, so a German company or an Austrian company, suddenly think that, for example, wages in, I don't know, Poland are lower. So people in Poland demand less money for the same work, so they outsource their company or parts of their company production or whatever to Poland, because first of all the wages are not that high, or there's less money that goes into insurances and so on and so forth, or also environmental standards. That's also an argument. That's not my favorite word. And let's see if I can. No, environment. there are, like, Central European or Middle European countries probably do have quite high standards when it comes to environmental laws. There are definitely countries where the standards are lower and where it costs the companies less money to like produce, because the laws that they have to obey are not that strict. So I guess that's also a reason for outsourcing. So we have wages, insurances, knowledge, of course. Knowledge. A standard example here would be IT companies outsourcing parts of their businesses to India, because that's where a lot of knowledge is around about IT and computers. They know a lot about technological stuff. They have really good universities educating people in IT and computers, software, hardware, whatever. So that's also a reason for outsourcing. There is countries where people know more about what you need, basically. I think that's it for outsourcing. And one last minus point for the globalization part is the advent of a lot more multinationals. There is a lot of people who say that smaller businesses cannot survive anymore, that they kind of die out because everything is taken over by multinationals, so the very, very big players in the market. Small businesses can hardly stand a chance against the big supermarket chains. So, which is probably true. Like, you do not really find any really small individual supermarkets anymore that do not, also in Austria, that do not belong to one of the very big chains. So that's probably a point of criticism as well. The big chains, the Ketten, they are of course cheaper. Usually they can also afford more products or more choice, broader choice really. As consumers, we obviously seem to really like that without thinking about the consequences, but then it is probably true that the bigger businesses take over the smaller ones. For the sake of the customers, it offers us a lot more choice and cheaper products, but I guess it also has repercussions. There are also effects on the small businesses. So multinationals are the big players on the markets and do bring a lot of money as well and do bring a lot of innovation, whatever. But they are a threat to the smaller ones, and that's a strong point of criticism in the whole concept of globalization. I think that was it. And very briefly, that's something that we'll only touch upon because it's a quite broad topic and it probably makes, or it would give you enough material for an own stream. When we did the vocab, I pointed out that exploitation is an issue in the whole concept of globalization. There is companies outsourcing their work to cheaper countries or to countries where the wages are not that high. And that does have to do with exploitation. So they exploit the workforce of the people without paying them a lot of money or enough money. And that's where fair trade comes in. Fair trade was originally established it dealt with, I think the idea in the beginning was groceries like banana, chocolate, and so on and so forth. It was about paying the producers fair wages or the laborers fair wages, and to make sure that it's environmentally friendly, like the production. Environmentally friendly. I think that was the basic idea of fair trade, so at the end of the day a very good idea. But there is also some, very much, what would I do without you? There's also some criticism going on. So people are not always sure if the concept of fair trade is really as good as they make us believe, basically. It is not a very transparent system, or so people say. Transparency seems to be a minus point of criticism. We do not always really know if the money like usually fair trade products are slightly more expensive than standard mainstream products. Nevertheless, people say that we do not really know if this like additional money really reaches the poorer countries or the countries that it is supposed to go to. So transparency is an issue. We do not really know if fair trade keeps the promises that it makes, basically. Critics also say that the bosses make a lot of profit, but compared to these profits, only very little money goes to the farmers, actually. So the point of fair trade was to help the farmers, but then there's also bosses involved. There's also a whole system in the background that basically, again, exploits the farmers and helps to enrich the bosses, but not the farmers. Prices are higher. That's what a lot of people answer when asked if they ever buy fair trade products. If they say no because they think that the prices are higher. Recently, there's also been some cases of corruption. So critics say that you can buy the fair trade logo, so you can you pay fair trade enough money and then they'll give you the fair trade certificate without really making sure that all the promises are kept. So without making sure that the respective producer really pays fair wages and that they really work in an environmentally friendly way. So corruption always has been an issue, obviously. The next point is a more personal one and doesn't really have to do with money. But then the farmers, I don't know, let's take chocolate production as an example. In, I don't know, Costa Rica maybe. Costa Rican chocolate farmers do have their traditions, their own old traditional ways of making chocolate. But then fair trade, or the concept of fair trade, prescribes a certain way of how chocolate has to be grown. And that means less self-determination, so they can't really do their farm work in the way they want to do it. So the traditions get lost, the traditions of the handicraft that it used to be get lost because they have to follow certain rules, and that's bad for the culture at the end of the day. Secretive policy, no one knows what's going on. Basically, it's just a rephrasing of the first line. We don't really know what's going on. And if fair trade really means fair trade, then, maybe they can buy the logo, they can buy the certificate. So it's all kind of secretive, geheimnisvoll kind of thing. The last point, it's against the local customs. People have to use farming machinery and chemicals that they would not otherwise use. So that again is probably bad for the environment. Chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides never really go down well, especially in countries that have never used it before and no experience with it. So they can't do farming in their own way that interferes into culture and heritage. Heritage being the word for Erbe. So farmers can't really pass on their knowledge to other generations, or the knowledge that they pass on is what the developed countries basically told them is the right way. So a lot of culture and a lot of traditions get lost. So that's why some people at the end of the day are not the biggest fans of fair trade, really. Even though the intentions behind fair trade were probably good, and the intentions behind fair trade were counteracting all the negative points of globalization. So I think that's it from my side. So for a quick recap for the exams, if I were you, I would prepare, as I said in the very beginning, I prepare a standing definition of what globalization is. Make sure that you know some of the pros and cons and that you can also give examples. That you also have some solutions ready, so fair trade as a solution or not to the whole exploitation issue. You should maybe also be able to provide some information on the institutions, so the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, what does the G7 or what do the G7 do? what's the point? Yeah, I guess that's it for today about international trade. If you have questions, ask. And if not, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.